Gold Rush Girl. We keep reading. We're at chapter 28. And she heard a crunching on the beach behind her. Startled, I spun around. It was Senor Rosales, candle in hand. Corita, is that you? Did you find Jacob? Though glad to see him, I shook my head. He came up to me. The candle lit his face enough for me to see his concern. What did you do? I said. We searched 2 ships, but it got dark, so Thad went to get a lantern. I have spoken to some friends. I hate to tell you, but they believe Senor Fallon, the man we saw, the chief of La Policia, he knows about all this business, this crimping. The police chief? I cried. It's what I was told, that he or his officers take some of the money for those who have been stolen. Bribes. I can't say for sure. Do you wish me to walk you back to the tent? No, Thad is returning. We're going to search some more. And La Noche? He's getting a lantern. I have to keep looking. Please, Corderita, be careful. Con cuidado. We will, I said. He hesitated, and then he said, let me see you in the morning, please. Otherwise, I will worry. Buenos noches. I pray for him. He made the cross over his chest. Buenos noches, senor, I said. I watched him as he moved away in the dark. As I continued to sit in the rowboat, I thought about what he had told me, that the police might be involved in the kidnapping. Is there anything more appalling than believing that the people you think can help you, should help, are your enemies? And what can one do when all you have is questions and no answers? And what if your brother's life depends on getting at least one right answer? And what if my parents show up and the first thing they say is, where's your brother? I sat there feeling small and cold, not wanting to think. Only bad thoughts came. Too many what ifs. Tori! With a start, I turned around. Along the shore, I saw a bobbing glow coming in my direction. It was Thad. Got light! He lifted up a lantern. I climbed out of the rowboat. Thad set the lantern into it. Let's go, he said. Do you think we should try now in the dark? I thought we had to. We do, I said. The 2 of us shoved the boat into the cold water, getting our feet wet. I took up the oars and began to row. How's Sam? I asked. Finest kid, said Thad. Finest was his highest compliment. Is he angry at me? He wasn't happy. He did say if we didn't find Jacob tonight, he might help tomorrow during the day. He works at night. Thad held up the lantern and stared out in the cove. He had to come out of the mercury to give me the lantern. He looked over his shoulder to me. Tori, he's really worried about that Mr. Castle. You shouldn't have said anything to the police. I stopped rowing. Thad said, he's sure Castle stole his brother and sold him into slavery. That's horrible, I said. I wish I could help. Wishing is what kids do. His words stung. I had said something like that to my father. Knowing Thad was right made the pain even worse. After a moment, I said, Senor Rosales came down here. He thinks the police know about the crimping and that they're part of it and that they make money from it. Does he know that for sure? Not exactly, I said. Thad looked at me. I could see he was troubled. Thad, I have to know. Am I doing everything wrong? You're trying to do what's right. I'll give you that. A lot of folks don't even try. Hey, if you don't put something down on the table, you won't ever win. Feeling miserable and feeling wrath at myself, I took a deep breath and began to row. The splash of the oars was steady. I kept thinking about Sam's brother and Jacob. I was tired of saying. I, who loved words, felt I used too many. Just wanting to do. I kept rowing. Our lantern light didn't reveal much. The cove was black, made a little choppy by a rising wind, which whispered low and breathy, reminding me of a sick person. Overhead, dark skimming clouds hid the stars in an almost full moon. Some light came out of the city, scattering sparks here and there upon the water surface. Spits of cold rain sometimes fell and made me shiver. I wish I had my mother's shawl. After a while, I said, where are we going? Another ship. I sighed. Just tell me which one. Thad held up his lantern. We were out into the cove, which was covered with dead ships, the masts and spars, a leafless forest vanishing in the high darkness. That one, said Thad, pointing. Why? He shrugged. It's the closest. I stared into the darkness and saw the ship's hulking shape. In moments, my oars' strokes brought us up against its hull with a bump. This ship was much bigger than the two we had already searched, soaring over our heads like a mountain cliff. When I looked up, I could barely see her masts, two, maybe three, which slid into the murky gloom. The wet wind whispered through her rigging. I edged around the ship, looking for a ladder or a line, such as the one we used before. At first, we found nothing, but finally Thad's lantern revealed some dropping rope, long enough that it trailed into the water. He gave a few yanks on them. One fell into the water and lay there like a coiled snake, only to sink. It took a while, but we did find a line that held fast when he pulled hard on it. He fastened its loose and slippery end to our rowboat so it would not float away. I glanced toward the shore, but could no longer see it. It was as if we were nowhere. How are we going to do this? I asked, peering up. Thad said, "You hold the lantern, I'll climb up the line. Think you can follow?" "Thad, I'm going first." I came out angrily, but it was more annoyance at myself for having nothing but bad thoughts. Thad said nothing, for which I was thankful. I said, "When I get on deck, I'll find another line to bring up the lantern. We're going to need light, then you come." I was talking as if I knew what I was doing. Didn't really feel that way. I just wanted to move. "I suppose," Thad replied. I could hear his doubt, and it bothered me. Not wishing to think too much, I reached as high on the line as I could and grabbed it with two hands, grateful that it wasn't wet and slimy. I began by giving the line a hard tug to make sure it would not come free. It held. Then, sucking in a deep breath and using all the strength I could muster, I hoisted my whole body until my legs lifted off the rowboat. Next, I swung my legs in so that my booted feet were flat on the side planking of the ship. With my arms holding my full weight, I moved my hands one over the other, hauling higher each time. Thus, I tugged myself upward, hand over hand, bit by bit, so that I was exactly walking up the side of the ship. The line was rough and my hands hurt. I was breathing fast, but I didn't stop. I dared not stop. It helped that the ship's hull was cankered, full of edges, which allowed my booted feet to gain purchase. All the strength from this hard labor I had done in these past few months helped me. I tried not to think what I was doing, only that I was going up. The higher I went, the darker it became. It was as if I were climbing into the night. The farther I climbed, the greater the ache in my arms, making me think my body would pull out of my shoulders. At one point, my hauling was so agonizing, I considered finding relief by letting go. But I'd reached such a high height that I was equally fearful of doing anything but continuing. I was afraid to look up or down. Accepting that I had little choice except climbing, I pulled hand over hand, moving up inch by inch. The ship had seemed large when I first saw it. Now it felt gigantic. I continued to yank and walk, step by step, until finally I came within the reach of the top rail. By then, I was hitty-giddy, my breath popping in puffs, my arms and sides in jangling pain. The only light, blurry in my tear-filled eyes, came from Thad's lantern far below. The last moment was the hardest and agonizing. I pulled my right hand away from the line, which meant I was holding my entire weight with my left hand. Then I grabbed the top rail of the ship with my free right hand to let go of the line. As fast as anything I did in my entire life, shifted my left hand onto the railing. Now at least I was hanging by two hands. Heaving, pulling, and lugging desperately, I yanked myself up and over the railing and then tumbled down onto the other side of the bulkboard, where I landed on the deck of the ship with a hard thud. What seemed a long time, I just lay there, my breath coming in rapid, shedded huffs. There was nothing but hurt inside and outside my body. I felt nauseous. My arms burned. My fingers were numb and raw. I licked a finger. I think I tasted blood. Happily, it was so dark I couldn't see. "Are you all right?" I heard Thad shout. His voice came from a great distance. I pulled myself up until I was standing, albeit a little shaky, and looked down over the railing. Thad was standing in the boat, looking up from what seemed to be a deep and narrow well of pale yellow light. "Tori, are you all right?" It wasn't true, but I shouted, "Fine. Get something to bring up the lantern." I looked about. It was hard for me to see anything. Then I saw dimly a tangled coil of line at my feet. I grabbed it and threw it over. I watched as Thad took hold of the end and tied it to the handle loop of the lantern. Pull her, he called, which I did, halfway up the hull. I'll keep it there so you can climb, I shouted and tied the line off. Can you walk up the way I did? Use the line I used. It should hold. I will, he yelled and began to walk up the side of the ship. At one point he skidded. I think he was trying to move too fast, and his feet went off the hull. For moments he dangled in the air, swinging like a clock's pendulum. My heart squeezed. Somehow he managed to hitch himself around and threw his feet forward, secured a firm tread, and a tighter grip on the line, and then once again he continued up. It was as hard for him as it was for me, the big difference being that at the last moment when he was in a reach, I hung over the rail, grabbed his wrists, and helped bring him aboard. In moments, we were both standing side by side on the ship's main deck. Thad's breath came in short gulps. I was thinking, this is too hard, but I knew there were harder things to come. Chapter 29. Thad said, I slipped. Scary. You got here, I replied, not wanting to talk about it. Instead, I hauled up the lantern. The lantern's light enabled us to survey the ship's deck. It was desolate and disorderly, with all manners of things strewn about. Lines, wood, boxes, and broken barrels. Overhead, squinty and scrawny masts and spars spiked up and away. The only sounds I heard were the ship's timbers grating and groaning, the way I imagined a person might sound when in slow, agonizing death. I thought, all these ships have been left to rot, but it's not the ships that are rotten. What's rotten is leaving them for gold. Come on, I said, whispering, though why I whispered I wasn't sure, save that it was an under-breathy kind of place. Staying close to each other, lantern held before us, we walked about the upper deck with care. We went from bow to stern and back again, searching as much as we could, trying to make sure we did not trip on the litter. Our footsteps made squeaky creaks among the deck planks. At one point, I stopped and cried out, Jacob! Jacob! No reply. We found an open hatchway, the steps leading steeply down. I leaned over, shining the lantern into the darkness. Jacob, are you there? It's me, Tori. Jacob! It made my throat hurt to scream so. The only reply was an empty echo of my own voice. I tried to decide if I should go below. Thad, as if reading my mind, said, we should check down there. I leaned over the hatchway again. Jacob! I yelled as loud as I could. No answer. I told myself there had to be many rooms, berths, and cabins on the lower deck. If Jacob was trapped or confined there, the only way to find him was to go down. A rope banister was slung along one side of the steps, holding the lantern in one hand, the rope in the other. I took perhaps 15 steps down until I was a few feet above the lower deck. Thad came down right behind me. The lantern light allowed me to look into the vast empty cavern, the cross timbers looking like the ribs of some enormous hollow beast. Against the port and the starboard side were multiple sleeping berths, everything empty. It made me think of a cemetery with nothing but open, unfilled graves. The lower deck was another confusion of boxes and barrels, and rats. I saw their eyes like hot embers reflecting the glow of my lantern. Impossible to count their numbers. My light or shouting must have disturbed them because the deck floor fairly quivered with these dirty, revolting beasts, with their constant high-pitched squeaks. The thought that Jacob might be down among them made me queasy. Jacob! I yelled. The rats scurried, the patter of their tiny feet enough to raise goosebumps up my arms. I waited for a reply, any reply. None came, just rats. He's not here, I said and backed up. Thad went before me. Without saying anything, we returned to the rail where we had come aboard. Trying not to sound defeated and dirty, which is how I felt, I said, we'll need to try another ship. Thad said, I'll go down first. I'll catch you if you fall. Irritated, I said, I'm not going to fall. I held the lantern over the topgallant rail. Thad grasped our climbing line and hoisted himself onto the rail. For a moment, he sat there. Then he flipped over onto his belly with his feet hanging over the side. Using two hands, he slid down until his head disappeared. I watched him as he went, moving a lot faster going down than he had when he came up. He reached our rowboat. I'm here, he yelled. Using another line, I lowered the lantern into his hands. He held it up so I could see where I needed to go. I'm coming, I called, and grabbed the same line he had used. First, I hoisted myself to the top gallant rail and then let my feet dangle over nothing. Gripping the line as tightly in two hands as I could, I spun about and began to descend. When I had come up, hard as it was, I hadn't considered how much harder it was going to be going the other way. Now my weight pulled me down as if I had gained 100 pounds. My body wanted to drop, but my brain told me I must not. I might land in the water, and I could not swim. I tried to descend hand over hand, but the palms of my hands burned. And then, after I'd gone down no more than a third of the way, Thad's lantern light went dark. Clinging to the line, I hung there, unable to see anything. Thad, I screamed. Right here. What happened? The oil must have been used up. Are you all right? No, keep talking. I've got to keep coming. I started going down again, moving slower than before, which was also more painful. I had no idea how far I was above the water and Thad. I paused. I swayed. Are you there? I yelled. Talk. Next moment, Thad began to sing. You're crowded in with dirty men. Fattening hogs are in a pen. And what will more a man provoke is musty plug tobacco smoke. The ladies are compelled to sit with dresses in tobacco spit. The gentlemen don't seem to care, but talk of politics and swear. You're close, he shouted. Next moment, I felt his hands on my boots. My relief was so great that my grip on the line gave way and I tumbled, falling on top of Thad, so we both went floundering in the bottom of the rowboat. It rocked wildly, shipping with some water. We lay there, too skeevy to move, until the boat became steady. I pushed myself up. All I could say was, why were you singing that song? So you knew where I was. Where did you ever learn that song? I don't know. Think it's funny. It's not, I said. Except my respite from fright was so great that I did start to laugh. Then he laughed too. Our sense of safety made us giddy. We got onto the boat seats. I rubbed my arms. That was almost impossible. Right, gory, he agreed. Ready to try another boat? I did want to, but I said, not without a lantern. We need to get extra oil and a flint. Let's go to shore. Though my hands felt raw, once our rowboat was set free, I pulled up the oars and headed us back to Cove Beach. Gradually, light from the city allowed us to make our way. I was glad to be rowing. The steady strokes freed up my muscles. Within minutes, we were on shore and had the boat hauled up. We stood there, staring out at the ghostly fleet. Glad to be on land, I realized I was completely worn out. My legs felt weak. I can't do any more, I said, disappointed in myself. In the morning early, we can look some more. Sure, said Dad. Do you think Jacob could be somewhere other than the ships? Sam seems to know what he's talking about, I said. Then I added, thank you for your help. Full of gratitude, but not knowing how to say it or show it beyond these simple words. Said Thad. He lifted a lantern. Should get this back to Sam. He's probably still at the Mercury. I was too tired to talk, and we started walking, going along Montgomery Street until we reached the Central Wharf. Once there, we headed out, finding it crowded with shouting and carousing miners. Many were slovenly with drink. San Francisco at its worst. We had to push and squeeze our way through the maelstrom of men. As we approached the entrance to the Mercury, there were two men having a fist fight. A crowd had gathered round them, and while the men were bloodying each other, the onlookers were clearly enjoying it, encouraging the men to fight harder. It is difficult to say what this violence did more, disgust me or frighten me. Thad and I moved away, but I could not take my eyes from the fight or the men who had gathered around. It was ugly. Why are you watching? I asked myself, even as I continued. We're going in, Thad asked me after a moment. I shook my head. I shouldn't go in there. Sam warned me about it. Sam was warned about talking to me. Warned about talking? I nodded. Because I'm white. Thad shook his head. That's what he said. Who warned him? That Mr. Castle. The crimp? I nodded. Thad, glowering, stood looking at the Mercury as if he could see the man. I may have already done harm by talking to the police, I reminded him. Sam doesn't need me to make things harder. Thad lifted the lantern. What about this? You bring it in. Castle doesn't know you. Thad considered me for a moment and then said, be back as fast as I can. He disappeared into the Mercury while I stood on the far side of the wharf. I waited, my eyes going from the ongoing fight to the entrance of the Mercury, wanting Thad to hurry. I was sorry we had come. This was not a good place to be. As I had that thought, Mr. Castle stepped out of the saloon and stood there, seemingly doing nothing other than observing the fight. Since the last thing I wanted was for him to see me, I moved farther away, but even doing so, I could not keep my eyes from him. Was he the one who had taken Jacob? I think I wanted to see something that would reveal to me that he was evil. The fact is, however, that he stood there calmly, merely watching, with no visible emotion I could observe, even as the two fighters exchanged ferocious blows. Then I was struck with the thought, is that what sin is? When people merely watch evil and do nothing to curb it? Next moment, Castle turned and looked in my direction. In that instance, I was sure his face showed recognition and anger. Worse, next moment, he spun about and, moving fast, rushed back inside the Mercury. I was not sure what to do, try to go after Castle or wait for Thad. I felt the need to tell Sam what happened, that Mr. Castle had seen me. Next moment, Thad reappeared on the edge of the crowd of miners. He looked around in search of me. "Thad," I called from across the wharf, lifting my hand. "Here." He worked his way through the crowd. When he got close, I grabbed his arm and began to lead him away. I said, "That Mr. Castle came out. He saw me." "You say anything?" "Did he say anything?" "No." "Did you see Sam?" "Yeah." "Gave him the lantern. Told him what we did. Told him we're going back early in the morning." "Think you should tell Sam that you saw Castle and that Castle saw you?" I shook my head. Oh, how I wished I had not come. "I should go back in and tell him," said Thad. I looked around. The fight in front of the Mercury was still going on, with even more men watching than before. "Not sure you can," I said. "Anyway, what if the man is observing Sam? If you went back, he might guess you're connected." "You decide what to do," said Thad. "In the morning," I said, "after we do some more research, I'll go to his tent and tell him." "Yeah, best get away then," he said. 2 days before, I had loved California. Now I hated it. In the darkness, we started uphill. I kept thinking about what had just happened. The brawling Mr. Castle, Sam and Jacob, how many ships there were, how endless, how hard our search might be. I didn't usually pray much, but I did then. "Please, God," I murmured, "help me." I had no idea what Thad was thinking because we didn't talk much until we got to my tent. When we got there, all he said was, "Be down early." "Thank you," he started off. "Good night." "Thad," I called, "truly, I appreciate your help." "Nothing, and don't worry, we're going to find him. We will." In moments, he was out of sight. I gazed after Thad for a few moments, thinking how lucky I was to have him for a friend. Then I ducked into our tent, which was darker than outside, stuffy and close. I felt for my bed, threw myself on it, and lay there, muscles sore, spirits jangled. I fumbled about until I found my mother's shawl and wrapped it around myself, seeking some comfort. I was hungry, too. I hadn't eaten anything since morning. I reminded myself how much I had wished to be a heroine. That was stupid. I just wanted to find Jacob. Jacob is somewhere, I kept telling myself. I have to find out where. I have to. Like a waking nightmare, I gave myself over to remembering dangling from the ship in the dark. That wasn't good, I allowed myself to think. Scary. Then I spoke into the night. "Thank you, Thad. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Senora Rosales." Weary, I fell asleep. My last thought before I did was, what if I can't find Jacob? What if I really am no more than a little lamb, and the lobos are about? The lobos are wolves in Spanish. Oh my goodness, it's so exciting. It's hard to stop, but I'm going to stop there.